I am 85 years old, and 2 years ago, my son Richard sat down across from me at my own kitchen table and slid a brochure across it like he was afraid to hand it to me directly. It was for an assisted living facility over in Cookeville. Nice pictures, smiling people, a dining room that looked like a hotel. And Richard looked at me with the eyes of a man who had been rehearsing this conversation for months and did not know how it was going to go. I picked up the brochure. I looked at it for about 30 seconds. I set it back down on the table between us, and I said, "Richard, I love you, and I am not going there, and I need you to help me find another way." He did not think there was one. I knew there was one, and I'm going to tell you exactly what it was, and exactly how I found it, and exactly why I am still sitting in this house, the same house where I baked Patricia's wedding cake in 1979, the same house where Walter and I ate breakfast together for 56 years, the same house where I know which floorboard creaks and which window sticks, and where the light falls on a February morning in a way that has made me glad to be alive every single February for 47 years. I am still here, and I am going to tell you how. But first, let me tell you who I am, because I am not a special woman, and I do not want you thinking what I did requires something you don't have. I grew up in a family of 5 children in a farmhouse outside of Sparta, Tennessee, where my mother cooked 3 meals a day for 7 people on a wood stove and never once presented this as remarkable. We were not wealthy. We were fed and clothed and loved in the particular way that people love each other when they don't have the luxury of expressing it abstractly. They just show up every day and do the thing that needs doing. And that is the love right there in the doing of it. I started working the telephone switchboard in Cookeville in August of 1958. I was 21 years old, and I thought it was a temporary job until I figured out what I actually wanted to do. I retired 34 years later from the same chair in the same building, having connected more conversations than I could ever count. I learned something in those 34 years that I did not fully appreciate until much later. Most people are not saying what they actually mean, and the kindest thing you can do for someone is listen past the words to what is underneath them. Walter proposed to me on a Tuesday evening in October of 1957. Standing in my mother's front yard in the dark because he was too nervous to do it in the house with everyone watching. I said yes before he finished asking. We were married for 56 years, and when he died of a stroke in the winter of 2013, I sat in this kitchen for a long time before I understood how to be a person again. The moment this whole story really started is a Saturday morning in March of 2022. I was standing at my kitchen counter, this same counter, mixing a pound cake batter the way I have done 10,000 times in my life, and the room tilted just slightly, just enough. I grabbed the counter edge and I stood very still, and I thought, something has changed. Something had changed. And what happened next is what I want to talk to you about. Here is the thing I have to say carefully, because it is the thing that is hardest to say. I spent 34 years on that switchboard listening to people who needed to be connected to each other. And the most consistent thing I ever noticed across 34 years and more conversations than I can number is that the people who were most alone were not alone because nobody wanted to reach them. They were alone because something had gotten in the way of the connection. Pride, usually, or fear dressed up as pride, which is the same thing in different clothing. After the dizziness started, and after Richard brought the brochure, I had a choice to make. And the choice was not really about the facility versus staying home, although that is what it looked like on the surface. The real choice was this. Was I going to let what was happening to my body disconnect me from my own life the way a bad line disconnects two people who are both trying to reach each other? Or was I going to do the work of keeping the connection? And here is the paradox that I had to sit with for a while before I could move through it. Staying connected to my life required me to admit out loud to people I loved that I needed help. And admitting I needed help felt, for a woman of my age and my upbringing, like the very disconnection I was trying to avoid. It felt like the beginning of the end of being myself. It was not. It was the opposite. But I had to go through the feeling to get to the understanding. And the going through was not comfortable. And I want to be honest about that because I think the discomfort is what stops most people before they ever start. The first thing I did was something I had never done in 85 years of living, and I want to name it plainly so you understand what I am actually asking you to consider. I called my children together, Richard and my daughter Susan, who lives in Nashville, and my youngest boy Thomas, who is in Knoxville, and I told them the truth, not the managed version. Not the version where I minimize things to keep them from worrying. The actual truth about what had been getting harder and for how long and what I was genuinely afraid of. I had been a telephone operator for 34 years. I knew how to connect calls. I had spent my whole life facilitating other people's communication, and had quietly exempted myself from the same standard in my own family because the things I would have had to say felt too much like asking, and asking felt too much like burdening, and burdening the people I love felt too much like failure. That conversation in my living room on a Sunday afternoon in April of 2022 was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Thomas cried, which surprised me. Susan made lists, which did not surprise me. Richard sat very still and then said, "Mom, why didn't you tell us sooner?" And I said, "Because I am my mother's daughter, and my mother's daughter does not ask." He said, "You're asking now." I said, "I am asking now." That was the beginning of everything that came after. The second thing was making the real list, not the brave list I would have shown people, the actual one. Standing for long periods, gone. Bathtub without assistance, too risky. Driving after dark, done. Reaching the high kitchen shelves, dangerous. Managing the back steps to the garden, limited. Carrying anything heavier than a grocery bag, unreliable. Being alone in the house at night with no way to call for help quickly enough. The one that frightened me most and that I had told no one about. 7 items. Not one of them was a nursing home problem. Every single one of them was a solvable problem, and I want to go through them because I think people don't believe this until they see it itemized. The bathtub became a walk-in shower with a bench and grab bars, installed by a man named Gerald from the hardware store who had done it for 3 other women on my street and who had it finished in less than a day. The high shelves got reorganized so that everything I use daily lives at counter height, and the high shelves hold things I access rarely and with Richard's help when I need them. The back steps to the garden got a handrail that Thomas put in on a Saturday morning in May, and I was back in my garden the following week, which matters more than I can explain because the garden is where I think and the thinking is what keeps me oriented. The driving I handed over partly to Susan, who calls it her Thursday errand with me and who I have noticed actually looks forward to it, and partly to a volunteer driving program through the County Senior Services Office that I did not know existed until I called and asked. The carrying problem got solved with a small rolling cart that I resisted for 3 weeks because it looked like something I was not ready to be, and then used once and thought, Mildred, this is just a tool. Use the tool. And the last item, the being alone at night, I solved with a medical alert button and with something else that surprised me more than the button did. I asked my neighbor Cecilia if she would be willing to check on me. Not daily, not as a job, just knowing I was there and me knowing she knew. Cecilia is 71 and has been my neighbor for 22 years and had been offering to help me in various ways for months that I had been politely declining. When I finally asked her directly, she said, Mildred, I have been waiting for you to ask me that for 6 months. 6 months. She had been waiting 6 months to be let in, and I had been keeping the door closed out of pride that was not serving either one of us. The third thing I did was figure out what I could still give and make sure I kept giving it. After Walter died and after Patricia and after the dizziness started, there was a version of me that began to believe that what I had been was more real than what I was now. That the Mildred who baked and connected people and showed up and did the thing was the real one. And whatever this slower, more careful version was, that was just what was left. I had to correct that thinking deliberately, the way you correct a bad connection on a line, not once, repeatedly, until the new signal held. I could not stand at the counter for an hour making a pound cake, but I could sit at the kitchen table and teach my granddaughter, Lily, who is 19 and interested in baking in a way that makes me unreasonably happy, every recipe I have in my head. We started on a Thursday afternoon in June of 2022 with a basic yellow cake, and we have worked our way through 34 recipes since then. And I have written them all down in a notebook with the notes that don't appear in any recipe book, the real notes, the ones that only come from having made a thing 1,000 times. That notebook is going to outlast me, and it is going to feed people I will never meet, and I consider it among the best things I have ever made. What I could give changed. I did not stop giving. Those are different things, and the difference is everything. The fourth thing I did was stop performing wellness for my children. I had been doing this for years without realizing it had a name. Every time one of my children called and asked how I was doing, I said fine or pretty good or can't complain, regardless of how I was actually doing. Not because I was lying exactly, because I had spent so many years being the steady one, the capable one, the one who managed, that being less than that felt like a betrayal of something. What I was actually betraying was a relationship, because a relationship where one person is always fine is not a relationship. It is a performance with an audience. After that Sunday afternoon conversation, I started answering the question honestly, not dramatically, not cataloging every difficulty, just honestly. Richard would call and ask how I was doing, and I would say, "My balance was off this morning, and I'm tired, but the garden looks good, and Lily came Thursday, and we made the apple cake your father liked." That kind of honest. The kind that includes the hard part and the good part both. The calls got longer. The conversations got realer. My children started calling more often, not because I was reporting problems, but because I was actually there on the line. Finally, instead of the well-managed version of me that kept everyone at a comfortable and useless distance. The fifth thing is the one that I find most difficult to explain, but that I believe matters most. I decided to stay inside my own life by being honest about what my own life actually was now and releasing my grip on what it used to be. I used to bake standing up at that counter for 4 hours on a Saturday morning. I cannot do that anymore. I used to drive anywhere I wanted at any hour. I cannot do that anymore. I used to manage this house entirely by myself, every corner of it without asking a single soul for a single thing. I cannot do that anymore either. And I grieve those things. I want to be clear that I grieve them properly, not rushed, not minimized. I sat with the losses the way I sat with the loss of Walter and Patricia, not forever, not to the point of being consumed, but long enough to honor what they actually meant. And then I looked around at what was left, and I found, to my genuine surprise, that it was considerable. The garden, the Thursday baking with Lily, the Sunday evenings when Richard comes and we watch whatever is on television. And sometimes we don't say much, and that turns out to be its own kind of conversation. The kind that 56 years of marriage taught me to value. The telephone calls that are now real instead of managed. The morning light in this kitchen. The floorboard that creaks. The window that sticks. The ordinary, irreplaceable evidence of my own life, still here, still mine, still worth getting up for. I want to talk to you directly now, and I want you to actually sit with what I'm about to say. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, this is a nice story, but my situation is different. My parent is further along. My circumstances are more complicated. This worked for her, but it might not work for me. You are using the complexity of your situation as a reason not to try the simpler things first. I was a telephone operator for 34 years. I know what it sounds like when someone is talking themselves out of a connection before they've let it ring. Let it ring. Right now, while you are watching this, there is someone in your life sitting in a house full of things that belong to them. Photographs, a particular chair, a window with a particular view, wondering whether anyone is going to fight for their right to stay there before the decision gets made for them. Your mother, your father, maybe you yourself, watching this alone in a house that is still yours and that you are not ready to leave and that nobody has asked you yet how you feel about. You have not asked a real question yet. You have had the worry conversation and the logistics conversation and the what would be easier conversation. You have not sat down at their table or yours and asked, what do you actually need to stay in your own life? What specifically? Can we make a list and look at it together? That question is where everything starts. It started everything for me. It will start something for you too if you let it. I will tell you plainly. I am going to die, not in a frightening way, just in the way of all things at the time appointed. I am 85 years old, and I have made my peace with the shape of things. What I think about in the quiet of the mornings before the house wakes up is not my own end. It is the people in your life who are in their last chapters right now and who don't know it, or who know it and haven't said so. Your mother, if she is still here. Your father, the older friend who has been there your whole life and who is slower than last year in ways you have noticed and not mentioned. They are running out of time to be in their own lives, and some of that time is in your hands. Not because you can stop what is coming, but because you can fight for the conditions that let them stay inside their own story for as long as possible. That fight is worth having. I am proof that it is worth having. The 2 years I have had since Richard put that brochure on my table, the garden and the baking and the real telephone calls and the Sunday evenings, that is not nothing. That is my life. The specific, ordinary, unrepeatable texture of my life, and I would not trade it for the nicest dining room in any facility in Tennessee. So here is what I want you to do, not eventually, this week, before the situation decides for you what the situation is going to be. If this is about someone you love, go to them. Sit at their table, not yours. Ask them out loud, directly, with enough quiet afterward to actually hear the answer. What they need to stay in their own home. Write it down. Then look at each thing on the list and ask, is this actually unsolvable, or have I just not looked for the solution yet? If this is about you, make the real list, the specific one, the one that takes courage to write, because every item on it feels like an admission. Then go through it one item at a time and ask, what would actually fix this? Call your county senior services office. Look into what programs exist in your area. You will find more than you currently know is there. And then do the thing that is hardest and most necessary. Let someone in, one person, all the way in. Tell them the truth about what is getting harder and what you need, not the managed version, the real one. I spent 34 years connecting people's voices to each other across a switchboard, and the one thing I know after all of it is this: the connection is always worth making, even when it is hard to reach, even when the line crackles, even when you have been almost too proud to pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. Your life is still on the other end of it, waiting.